The night they laughed her out of Iron Vale Military Medical Center, nobody paid attention to the way her hands stayed still. Not one tremor, not one flinch. Major Derek Pruitt stood in the center of the intake ward with 17 soldiers at his back, his voice cutting through the fluorescent-lit corridor loud enough to rattle the supply cart by the door. He was pointing at her, laughing at her, calling her a fraud in front of everyone who would listen, and Elena Marsh just stood there in her plain blue scrubs, holding a patient chart against her chest, and let him finish. She had survived things that would have destroyed every man in that room. They didn't know that yet, but they were going to. If this story already has you hooked, stay with me until the very end. Hit subscribe, leave a like, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The assignment had come through standard military contractor channels, routed through the Veterans Medical Liaison Office on a Tuesday with almost no fanfare. Elena Marsh, registered nurse, trauma specialist, temporary assignment to Iron Vale Military Medical Center, Decker County, Montana. 60-day rotation. She was replacing a staff member on emergency medical leave, filling in for surgical support and triage oversight during a period of elevated patient volume. The paperwork was clean. Her credentials were verified. Her background check cleared in under 48 hours, which the intake administrator, a thin woman named Corporal Shea, mentioned twice with an expression that sat somewhere between curious and suspicious. Fastest clearance I've seen for a contractor, Shea said, sliding the badge across the desk without looking up. I've done government work before, Elena said. What kind? Medical. Shea glanced up then, waiting for more. Elena gave her a small, polite smile and clipped the badge to her scrubs. The facility itself was a converted regional hospital absorbed into the military medical system nearly a decade ago, part of a larger infrastructure push after 2 consecutive base closures left the northern Montana district without adequate combat injury treatment capacity. It smelled the way all institutional buildings smelled, floor wax and antiseptic, and something underneath both that nobody ever bothered to name. The walls were the color of old cream. The overhead lights hummed at a frequency that wore on people after long shifts. Elena walked her floor on the first morning and cataloged everything she needed to know within 2 hours. 3 trauma bays, one of which had a malfunctioning suction line that someone had taped over with a note that said, "Maintenance requested. Date unknown." A medication cabinet in the east corridor that required a key code nobody had updated since the previous rotation. An emergency generator panel in the sub-basement that was accessible from the stairwell, which was itself accessible from 2 external entry points that weren't listed on the facility map she'd been given. She wrote none of this down. She didn't need to. The nurses on her floor were a mix, some career military, some contractors like her. Specialist Donna Gable, who ran the morning triage desk, was sharp and efficient and looked at Elena the same way Shea had, like she was trying to place her somewhere she couldn't quite locate. An older man named Watts, a licensed vocational nurse on the overnight rotation, welcomed her with a handshake that lasted too long, the kind that said, "I want to know if you're worth working with before I decide anything." "They send you from Billings?" he asked. "Liaison office," Elena said. "Same thing." She didn't correct him. By day 3, she had already caught the malfunctioning suction line, reported it through the correct maintenance chain with the specific equipment model and replacement part number, and covered the tape with a proper out-of-service tag. She had also reconfigured the medication cabinet key code and submitted a memo to the facility administrator requesting that external stairwell access points be added to the emergency egress map. Nobody thanked her for any of it. That wasn't why she'd done it. Major Derek Pruitt ran the administrative and security overlay for Iron Vale's East Wing, which in practical terms meant he controlled staff scheduling, access authorization, and the particular brand of low-grade institutional intimidation that men like him weaponized to protect their own position. He was 43, broad through the shoulders, with a jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to jut forward when he was annoyed. He wore his rank the way some men wore expensive watches. Not to tell time, but to make sure you noticed. Elena had seen his type before, more times than she could count. Environments that rewarded posturing over competence produced men like Pruitt in reliable quantities, and military-adjacent facilities were particularly fertile ground. He noticed her on day 4. She was in the middle of redressing a post-surgical wound on a sergeant named Farrow. A burn case, partial thickness, left forearm, the kind of injury that required precision and patience in equal measure. When Pruitt walked in with two of his subordinates trailing behind him like punctuation marks. "You the new contractor?" he asked, not to her exactly, but to the general space around her. "Yes, sir," she said, without turning around. She was in the middle of a gauze layer, and she wasn't going to rush it. "Name?" "Marsh, Elena Marsh." "Who authorized your clearance?" "Liaison office. You can verify with Corporal Shea." She heard him shift his weight, heard the sound of a tablet being handed between his subordinates. "Says here your specialty is trauma nursing." "That's right. No military service record. Contractor status, that's standard." There was a pause that lasted just long enough to be deliberate. "We don't get a lot of contractors up here, especially not women." Elena finished the gauze layer, smoothed the tape with 2 fingers, and turned around. She looked at Pruitt directly, the way you looked at a problem you'd already assessed and categorized. "Is there something you need from this room, Major?" she asked. "Or are you checking in on Sergeant Farrow's recovery?" Farrow, flat on his back, kept his eyes on the ceiling and said nothing. Smart man. Pruitt's jaw shifted. "Just getting familiar with my staff." "I'm not your staff, I'm a liaison contractor, but I'm happy to introduce myself properly if that helps." She stripped off her gloves and extended her hand. "Elena Marsh, trauma nurse. 12 years clinical, 8 in high acuity settings. Pleased to meet you." He shook it once, hard, the kind of grip meant to establish something. Elena matched it without effort and let go first. After he left, Farrow exhaled slowly. "Watch yourself with him," he said. "I know," she said. The first incident happened on day 7. Pruitt had quietly pushed through a scheduling change that moved Elena from the trauma rotation to administrative intake processing. Essentially a demotion in all but name, the kind of lateral shuffle that looked bureaucratic on paper and felt like a message in practice. Donna Gable pulled her aside in the break room and told her about it with the clipped, careful tone of someone who'd learned to document everything. "He did the same thing to Martinez last spring," Donna said. "Contractor from Phoenix, gone inside 2 weeks." "What was Martinez's background?" Elena asked. "Surgical. Good one, too." Pruitt didn't like that she went over his head on a supply issue. Elena nodded slowly. She got up, poured the last of the break room coffee into a paper cup, and drank it standing up. It was terrible coffee. She drank it anyway. She put in for a formal review of the scheduling change through the liaison office that afternoon, citing disruption to continuity of care for her active patients. The request was professional, precise, and supported by 3 specific clinical citations. It was also the kind of thing Pruitt would see as an act of war. He didn't disappoint. By the following Monday, there were complaints in her file. Vague ones, failure to follow communication protocols, a reported incident of insubordinate tone in a shift handoff, an anonymous concern about her handling of controlled substance logs. All of it thin, none of it with specifics attached. The kind of complaints that were designed not to survive scrutiny, but to create a paper record that justified whatever came next. Elena read through each one in the administrator's office, seated across from a captain named Briggs, who had the look of a man caught between 2 forces he didn't want to antagonize. "Major Pruitt has some concerns about fit," Briggs said carefully. "What specifically?" Elena asked. "There's a feeling that you may not be adjusting well to our particular operational culture." "What does that mean in practice?" Briggs shifted in his chair. "It means some of the staff find your communication style direct." "I'm direct because I work in trauma care," Elena said. "In trauma care, unclear communication kills people. If that's a problem with the operational culture here, that's a conversation worth having, but it's not a problem with me." Briggs said he'd review the situation. Elena thanked him for his time and left. She already knew the complaints would stay in the file. That was what they were for. What she hadn't anticipated was the confrontation going public. Pruitt chose a Thursday. The main corridor of the East Wing, 11 in the morning, maximum foot traffic. 2 junior officers flanked him. 3 nurses at the station behind her. A cluster of soldiers in transit from physical therapy, some still in compression wraps, moving in that careful way people moved when everything still hurt. He started with her credentials. "I've been looking into your background, Marsh," he said. His voice carried. He wanted it to carry. 12 years clinical, you said. That's funny, because I can only verify 8. And the facility you listed for your last 2 years of high acuity work, Kelmore Regional. I can't find any record that matches your name on their staff roster. Elena set down the chart she was carrying, slowly. Records from contracted government support positions are often restricted, she said. The liaison office can verify. I've already contacted the liaison office, he said. They routed me to a general inquiry line that hasn't called me back. He stepped forward. So I'll ask you directly. Who are you and what are you actually doing here? The corridor had gone quiet. In that particular way, places went quiet when something real was happening and everyone could feel it. The nurses behind her had stopped pretending to work. The soldiers from physical therapy had slowed to a stop. I'm a trauma nurse on a contractor rotation, Elena said. My credentials cleared standard background verification. If there's a discrepancy, it should be directed to... Stop redirecting, Pruitt said, sharp and flat. I want a straight answer. What were you doing for those 2 years? That's not something I'm authorized to discuss. He laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. She's not authorized, he said, turning slightly toward the soldiers behind him, performing now, working the audience. A nurse, who can't tell us where she was working for 2 years. Does that strike anyone else as something worth paying attention to? One of the junior officers smiled. Someone at the back made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh, but was close. Elena said nothing. You know what I think? Pruitt continued. I think you padded a resume. I think you got through verification on paper because someone wasn't looking closely enough. And I think you've been coasting in this facility on credentials that don't hold up. That's a serious accusation, Elena said. Then prove me wrong. He said it like a challenge, like he already knew she couldn't. The room was very still. How? She asked. That seemed to surprise him slightly, that she asked instead of deflecting. He recovered fast. Walk me through a trauma assessment, right now. Field conditions, no reference materials. I've got 2 med techs here. We'll run a scenario. You want to conduct an impromptu trauma assessment in an active patient corridor? I want to know if you actually know what you're doing. He pulled a tablet from the junior officer beside him. Or we can go to my office and you can explain those 2 missing years. Your choice. It wasn't a choice. He knew that. She knew that. Everyone watching knew that. The corridor is fine, Elena said. What happened in the next 22 minutes was the kind of thing that got talked about at Ironvale for a long time afterward, mostly in the break rooms and supply closets where people were honest with each other, away from the official record. Pruitt's medtechs were good. They ran the scenario hard, multi-trauma, compounding complications, 1 simulated patient crashing during assessment, while a 2nd required concurrent intervention. The scenario was designed to force prioritization errors under pressure. It was the kind of test that separated people who had read about trauma from people who had lived inside it. Elena worked through it without hesitation and without performance. No dramatic pauses, no looking around for approval, no visible calculation. She called interventions in order, adjusted for the secondary crash before the techs fully committed to the simulation of it, caught a detail in the airway assessment that one of the techs admitted afterward he'd seeded deliberately to see if she'd miss it. She didn't miss it. When it was done, one of the med techs, a specialist named Ortega, who had the careful face of someone who took his work seriously, said quietly, almost to himself, "That's the cleanest field assessment I've seen outside of a real deployment." Pruitt heard it. His jaw worked. "Anyone can run a scenario," he said. "You asked me to run a scenario," Elena said. "That doesn't answer my question about your background." "No," she said. "It doesn't." She picked up the chart she'd set down. "But it answers the question of whether I know what I'm doing, which was the other one you asked." She walked away. He wasn't finished. The escalation came that afternoon through official channels this time, which was worse in some ways. An administrative hold on her facility access pending a comprehensive credential audit. Not a suspension, Pruitt was careful about that, but a restriction that effectively pulled her off patient care until the audit was resolved. Her badge would still open the common areas. It would not open the trauma bays, the medication rooms, or the surgical support units. It was a cage with no bars. Elegant, in a bureaucratic way. Donna Gable found her in the break room at the end of shift, sitting with a cup of coffee she hadn't drunk, staring at the middle distance. "He filed it as a patient safety precaution," Donna said. angry in that compressed way of someone who'd seen too many versions of this. Which means HR has to honor it pending review. Could take 2 weeks, could take a month. How long does the audit take? However long Pruitt wants it to take. Elena was quiet for a moment. Outside the break room window, the last light of the afternoon was hitting the mountain range to the west, turning everything briefly gold and then dimmer. Montana light died fast. You should report this, Donna said, formally, to the civilian oversight. I know. He's done this before. Martinez, and before her, there was a man named Kruger who came in from the VA system, both gone inside 30 days. Pruitt doesn't lose these things, Elena. He has the administrative chain covered. I know, Elena said again. Donna looked at her for a long moment. You don't seem scared. Elena picked up the coffee, found it cold, drank it anyway. I'm not, she said simply. There was something in her voice that made Donna go quiet. Not reassurance exactly, but certainty. The kind of certainty that didn't need anything behind it because it came from somewhere that wasn't shaken by men like Derek Pruitt. Donna left without saying anything else. She wasn't sure what she'd expected, but it wasn't that. 3 days into the administrative hold, the audit still unresolved, Elena found something she wasn't supposed to find. It started with the supply discrepancy report she'd been processing during the hours when her access restrictions pushed her into administrative work, the only role available to her with a limited badge. She was moving through routine inventory documentation when she noticed the first irregularity. A recurring line item in surgical supply expenditures that appeared every 6 to 8 weeks, categorized under routine consumables, with a vendor code she didn't recognize. She checked the vendor code against the facility's approved contractor registry. It wasn't there. She checked it against the broader Department of Defense procurement database through the administrative portal, which her access tier technically still reached. The vendor code existed in the system, but the registered company, a supply contractor called Meridian Med Group, had a registered address that resolved to a mail forwarding service in Reno, Nevada. The company had been awarded 47 separate procurement contracts with military medical facilities across 3 states over the preceding 22 months. Total value, just under $4 million. Elena sat with that for a moment. $4 million, dispersed across contracts carefully sized to stay below the threshold that triggered automatic audit. Vendors who didn't exist at an address that wasn't real. She opened a second window and started cross-referencing the disbursement dates against facility access logs, which she could still reach through the administrative terminal. She was looking for a pattern. She found one in under an hour. The disbursements clustered within 72 hours of specific access events. Someone with an elevated clearance code moving through systems she wouldn't normally look at because they weren't connected to patient care. The clearance code resolved through 2 redirects in the system architecture that most people would have stopped at to an internal authorization credential, assigned to Major Derek Pruitt. Elena closed the windows carefully, in order, making sure she left no active session flags. She sat in the administrative annex with her hands flat on the desk in front of her, in a room with one exterior window and a door she hadn't locked. She was not afraid, but she was now very careful. Because whatever Pruitt was running through this facility's procurement system, it wasn't a small operation. And the administrative hold he'd placed on her, the credential audit, the access restrictions, all of it, it hadn't been about protecting the facility from an unverified contractor. It had been about protecting himself from someone who was starting to look in the wrong direction, which meant the timeline had just changed. She went through the external reporting channels that night, working from her personal device, using a secure network protocol she hadn't needed in years, and found she still remembered exactly how to configure. She prepared a documentation package, organized, sourced, specific, with the access log data captured in screenshot before she'd closed the sessions, and routed it through a channel that bypassed Iron Vale's administrative structure entirely. Not to civilian oversight, not to the facility administrator, not even to the liaison office. To a contact she hadn't reached in 4 years, who worked in a division of the Defense Department's Inspector General office that didn't show up on the public organizational chart. She sent one additional message, short. No identification necessary. He would know who it was from the routing alone. Iron Vale MMC, procurement fraud, possible embedded network. I've been contained, need independent eyes before this gets cleaned. She put down the device and went to sleep. She slept well, She always did, in the hours before things became unavoidable. It was a skill she'd developed a long time ago, in places where the margin between one outcome and another was measured in seconds, and the only thing that made the seconds count was arriving at them rested. The response came at 4:47 in the morning. Not a message, but an action. Her personal device logged an incoming verification ping from a server infrastructure she recognized because she'd used it herself, once, in a context that had no official name and no public record. Somebody had received her package. Somebody had begun moving on it. By morning, she was back in the facility, badge around her neck, walking the East Wing corridor with the same unhurried pace she always used. Her access restrictions were still technically in place. The audit was still technically pending, but she had set something in motion that moved on its own schedule now, and Derek Pruitt, whatever he thought he was doing, was already behind it. She was at the triage desk, reviewing morning patient charts with Donna Gable, when Pruitt appeared at the end of the corridor with 3 men she didn't recognize. Not military, not medical. The cut of their clothes was wrong for both, and the way they moved, too aware, too coordinated for a casual walkthrough, flagged immediately. Donna looked up from a chart and frowned. "Who are those?" "Go check on Pharaoh in Bay 2, Elena said quietly. "Don't come back to this station for 20 minutes. Donna looked at her. "Elena, please," Elena said. Not a command, not a request exactly. The word came out level and direct, and Donna heard something underneath it that she didn't have language for. She went to Bay 2. Pruitt and the 3 men were moving toward the triage station with the deliberate pace of people who had decided something and were arriving to act on it. Pruitt's face had the look of a man who'd made a calculation and come up with an answer he was satisfied with. He stopped in front of Elena. "Your access hold has been upgraded," he said. "Effective immediately. You're being escorted from the facility pending full removal of contractor status. Your liaison office has been notified." "On what grounds?" Elena asked. "Unauthorized access to protected procurement records," he said. Quiet now. No performance this time. Just the 2 of them and 3 men whose job it was to make sure this went the way he'd decided it would go. "You were in systems you had no business being in." "I was in systems accessible from my authorized administrative terminal," she said. "That will be determined during review." He nodded toward the 3 men. "These gentlemen are going to walk you out. You can collect your personal items from your locker. Your badge will be deactivated at the east exit." Elena looked at the 3 men, looked at Pruitt, looked, briefly, at the long corridor behind him, where 2 soldiers were pretending not to watch and doing a poor job of it. She reached up slowly, deliberately, and unclipped her badge from her scrubs, set it on the desk in front of her. "All right," she said. Pruitt blinked. He'd expected something, argument maybe, or a formal protest, or at least the performance of indignation. He'd gotten none of it. Just that flat, quiet compliance that felt, for some reason he couldn't name, worse than resistance. "All right," he repeated, as if testing the word. "You should check your procurement archive," Elena said. Her voice was conversational, almost gentle. "The 72-hour window around your access events. Someone may have noticed an irregularity." The color changed in his face. It happened fast, and then locked down fast. But she'd seen it, and the 3 men had seen it, and one of them, the one on the left, who'd been the most still of the 3, shifted his weight in a way that had nothing to do with Pruitt's plan. "Escort her out," Pruitt said. Elena walked with them without another word, her hands loose at her sides, her steps unhurried. At the east exit, she stopped and turned once, looking back down the corridor toward the triage desk, toward the trauma bays behind their closed doors, toward the facility that had spent 10 days deciding she didn't belong. Outside, the Montana morning was sharp and cold, the air carrying the bite of altitude and something coming down from the north. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She looked at the screen. An encrypted message. 3 words, no sender identification needed. 30 minutes out. Elena put the phone away. She walked to her vehicle in the facility's contractor parking area, got in, and sat with the engine off and her hands resting on the wheel. She didn't start the car. She watched the east entrance of Ironvale Military Medical Center in her rearview mirror, noting the positions of the external security cameras, the angle of the morning light against the glass entrance doors, the timing of the patrol vehicle that circled the lot every 11 minutes. She noted all of it and filed it away, the way she had always filed things away. Not writing them down, not needing to, just adding them to the architecture of what she knew, which was already considerable, and which was about to matter in ways Derek Pruitt had not begun to understand. 30 minutes. She settled back in the seat and waited, still and patient as stone. The 30 minutes passed in 27. She heard them before she saw them. 2 vehicles, unmarked, moving fast up the access road from the county highway. Not military transport. Civilian-plated SUVs, dark and unadorned, the kind that didn't announce themselves because they didn't need to. They pulled into the facility's main lot without using the contractor entrance, which meant someone had already coordinated access with facility security, which meant the 30-minute window had been used for more than just driving. Elena got out of her car. The first SUV stopped and a woman stepped out. Mid-40s, short dark hair going silver at the temples, wearing a charcoal jacket over a collared shirt with no insignia. She moved like someone who had learned to be economical about everything, including how she crossed a parking lot. She looked at Elena with the focused, assessing look of a person who had read a file and was now reconciling it with the actual human being standing in front of her. "Marsh," she said. Not a question. "Yes." "Special Agent Renata Voss, Defense Department Inspector General, Special Investigations." She didn't extend her hand. "You sent us a package." "I did." "It was thorough." A pause. "More thorough than I expected from a contractor working an administrative terminal under access restrictions." "I used to do more complicated things than that," Elena said. Voss looked at her for another beat, the kind of look that was storing information rather than reacting to it. "We're going to need you inside." "They just walked me out." "Yes." Voss turned slightly toward the facility entrance. "That's about to change." What followed was not dramatic, which was in some ways the most dramatic thing about it. No shouting, no confrontation in the main corridor, no moment where Pruitt appeared and the situation cracked open in front of everyone. Instead, Voss and her team moved through Iron Vale's administrative structure with the quiet, implacable efficiency of people who had done this before and knew exactly which doors to walk through in which order. They went first to Briggs, the facility administrator, who took 12 minutes to understand what was happening and another 4 to stop visibly sweating. He signed the temporary reinstatement authorization for Elena's facility access, while Voss stood beside his desk and said almost nothing, which was its own form of pressure. One of Voss's team, a younger agent named Darby, wire-framed glasses, the kind of face that people tended to underestimate, had already interfaced with the facility's IT infrastructure and placed a preservation hold on every system Pruitt had touched in the last 18 months. Elena walked back through the east entrance at 9:14 in the morning with her badge reclipped to her scrubs and Voss moving half a step behind her. Pruitt was in his office. He knew something had shifted. She could see it in the set of his shoulders when Voss's team entered the administrative wing, the way his eyes tracked the movement of people who weren't his people, who weren't moving the way his people moved. He didn't come out of his office right away. That was calculation, not confidence. He was buying time to figure out his angle. Voss knocked twice and opened the door without waiting. Elena stayed in the hallway. She didn't need to be in the room for this part. She could hear well enough, and she had other things to pay attention to. Because the 3 men who'd escorted her out that morning, the non-military ones with the coordinated movement and the wrong kind of clothes, 2 of them were still in the building. She'd clocked them during the walk back through the corridor, positioned separately, not together, which was worse than if they'd been together because it suggested they'd been given different assignments after the escort job was done. She found Ortega, the medtech from the trauma scenario, restocking supplies in the corridor outside Bay 3. "Those men who came in with Pruitt this morning," she said quietly, "the ones who walked me out. Have you seen 2 of them in the building since?" Ortega looked up from the supply cart. He had the careful face of someone who paid attention and knew when a question meant more than its words. "One near the east stairwell about 20 minutes ago. The other I saw going into the records annex." "Is the records annex normally accessed in the morning?" "No, it's an afternoon administrative function. Morning access requires sign-in with Briggs's office." Elena nodded once. "Thank you." She walked toward the records annex at the measured pace of someone with somewhere reasonable to be. The annex was 2 corridors off the main east wing, down a branch that dead-ended at a fire door. 3 rooms, physical records storage, the imaging archive, and a small server room that handled the facility's internal document management system. The server room door was ajar. She could hear movement inside. Not the sound of someone authorized and unhurried, but the specific quality of someone moving with purpose and limited time. She pushed the door open. The man inside was not young. Late 30s, built compact, with the kind of hands that had spent time doing precise work. He had a small device plugged into the server rack's diagnostic port, and a tablet in his left hand showing a progress bar. He looked up when the door opened, and the expression that crossed his face was the controlled version of alarm, the kind that lasted only a fraction of a second before training closed over it. "This area is restricted," he said. "I know," Elena said. "That's why I'm here." He reached for the diagnostic device. She was faster. Not dramatically, not with any flourish, just faster, the way people were faster when speed was a thing they'd practiced until it was involuntary. She caught his wrist before his fingers closed on the device, applied specific pressure to the joint, and held him still. The tablet dropped from his other hand and clattered on the floor. "Don't," she said. He was strong and he tried to use it. She redirected, shifted her weight, and had him turned against the server rack in under 3 seconds. The grip she used was precise enough not to break anything and firm enough to communicate that breaking things was absolutely a possibility she was comfortable with. "The device stays plugged in," she said quietly, close to his ear. "And you're going to tell me what it was pulling." He said nothing, which was a form of professionalism she could respect even as she removed his access badge with her free hand and stepped back, putting herself between him and the door. "Okay," she said. She raised her voice enough to carry to the corridor. "I need Agent Darby in the server room." Well, Darby arrived in 90 seconds, which was fast enough that he must have been close. He took in the scene, the man held against the rack, the device still in port. Elena's expression, without reaction, just pulled out his own tablet and started working. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Exfiltration tool," Darby said, not looking up. "It's copying specific file categories, procurement records, access logs, authorization credentials. The categories match the documentation set you sent us." He pulled the device carefully, bagged it. "Someone knew we were coming." "Someone told them we were coming," Elena said. Darby glanced at Pruitt's man, who was now seated on the floor by the server rack with his hands zip-tied in front of him and the expression of someone who was doing the math on his situation and not enjoying the results. "Yeah," Darby said quietly. "That's what I'm thinking too." The man on the floor said, "You've got nothing on me. I'm a private consultant. I was authorized to—" "By who?" Elena asked. He closed his mouth. "The authorization would have to come from someone with administrative access," Elena said, "which puts us back to the same name we already have. So I'm not sure what you think you're protecting by staying quiet." She looked at him steadily. "But that's your choice." Darby was already on his radio. "Oh." The situation inside Iron Vale's administrative wing escalated in controlled stages over the following 2 hours, the way these things went when they were handled by people who'd done them before. Pruitt was formally notified of the investigation and legally barred from accessing any facility systems or personnel while the inquiry was active. He did not take this calmly. Elena heard part of it through Briggs's open office door, Pruitt's voice, raised and sharp, cycling through the phases she'd seen men like him cycle through. Denial first, then the performance of outrage, then veiled threats about who he knew and what channels he had access to. Voss's responses were inaudible from where Elena stood, which meant they were deliberate and quiet, which was always the more powerful choice. She was at the triage desk, reviewing her reassigned patient charts from the past 3 days of restricted access, when Donna Gable appeared beside her. "What is happening?" Donna said. It wasn't a question. "An investigation," Elena said. "Into Pruitt?" "Among other things." Donna was quiet for a moment, processing. She had the look of someone recalibrating against new information and finding the new picture disturbingly clarifying. "The supply irregularities. I noticed something odd in the expenditure report 6 months ago and brought it to Briggs." "What did Briggs say?" "That it was a categorization issue and accounting had already flagged it." Donna paused. "Which I believe because I had no reason not to." "It wasn't a categorization issue," Elena said. "No." Donna exhaled. "How long has it been going on?" "At least 22 months, probably longer. We'll know more once the forensic accounting team gets into the archive. Donna looked at this patient chart in Elena's hands, the one Elena had picked up as if continuing a normal morning, as if federal agents were not currently working through the administrative structure of the building around them. You knew, Donna said slowly. When you came in, you knew something was wrong here. I suspected procurement environments in facilities like this could be vulnerable, Elena said. She set the chart down. That's not why I came. Then why? Because Pharaoh's wound needed proper care, and the suction line in Bay 2 was broken, and someone put in a work order and then didn't follow up. She said it matter-of-factly. There were patients here who needed what I could provide. That's the whole reason. Donna stared at her for a long moment. You're very strange, she said finally. I know, Elena said. By early afternoon, the picture that was assembling itself from the procurement records, the access logs, and the exfiltration device. Darby had pulled from the server room was larger and stranger than a single facility operation. Voss found Elena in the break room. The same break room, the same terrible coffee, which Elena was drinking again because she'd been awake since before 4 and the afternoon was stretching long. Voss sat across from her without asking, set a thin folder on the table between them, and looked at it rather than at Elena when she spoke. Meridian Med Group isn't just a ghost vendor, Voss said. It's one of 9. They're structured as a shell network. Each entity handles contracts across different facility types, all sized below audit threshold. The combined disbursements across the network over the past 3 years are closer to 11 million. Elena looked at the folder. How many facilities? 14, across 3 states. Ironvale is one of the larger ones. Voss opened the folder, turned it so Elena could see the first page. A network diagram with facilities marked and connecting lines between vendor entities and authorization sources. There are 3 separate individuals with elevated access credentials, whose authorization patterns match the disbursement windows across these facilities. Pruitt is one of them. Elena studied the diagram. She recognized the architecture. It was procurement fraud designed to survive casual auditing, which it had for nearly 3 years. The authorization credentials were the key, which was why the man in the server room had been trying to pull them before the investigation could lock the system. The other 2? She asked. One is a contracting officer at a DoD regional office in Billings. The other, Voss paused, the deliberate pause of someone choosing their words. The other has a clearance level high enough that the moment we formally flag the account, the notification goes somewhere I don't control. Elena set down her coffee. What level? High enough, Voss said, which was an answer that contained its answer. What I'm telling you is that this investigation just became more complicated than a facility-level procurement case. You're telling me someone is going to try to slow this down. I'm telling you the pressure is already coming in. I got a call 20 minutes ago from a number I'm not going to name, suggesting that the evidentiary threshold for moving on the 3rd authorization credential might need to be higher than standard. Elena was quiet. Outside the break room window, the afternoon light on the mountains had shifted, the sharp gold of morning replaced by something flatter, colder, the light of a sky considering weather. What do you need from me? She asked. The access log capture you sent us. The one that showed Pruitt's credential linked to the disbursement windows. Did you document the method you used to reach that data? Step by step, Elena said. And the 2 redirects in the system architecture, documented with timestamps. Voss exhaled, something that might have been relief in someone less controlled. That's the thread. If the chain of custody on that documentation is clean, it's clean regardless of what pressure comes in at the credential level. She looked at Elena directly for the first time in the conversation. How clean is it? As clean as I know how to make it, Elena said. And I've had to make things clean under worse conditions than an administrative terminal. Voss held her gaze. Your file, she started. Is classified, Elena said. Yes. A pause. The parts that aren't classified are interesting enough. Elena picked up her coffee again. It was cold. She drank it. I was a nurse for 12 years, she said. That part's not classified. That's not all you were. No, Elena agreed, but it's what I am today. Voss almost said something else and then didn't. She closed the folder, stood up, and walked to the door. She paused with one hand on the frame. There's something else. The 3rd individual in the network, The high clearance one. The access pattern on their credential shows activity at Iron Vale 3 weeks ago. Physical access, not remote. Elena looked at her. 3 weeks ago, I hadn't started the rotation yet. I know, Voss said, which means whatever they were doing here, it wasn't connected to you, but it means they have a reason to care about what gets found at this facility specifically. She looked back over her shoulder. I'm telling you this because you're better positioned than most people to understand what it implies. She left. Elena sat with the empty coffee cup and the implications. Someone with a high enough clearance had been physically inside Iron Vale 3 weeks before Elena arrived. Pruitt's network had been running for nearly 3 years. The operation was structured, patient, and careful. Not the work of someone improvising, but the work of someone who understood institutional blind spots and had exploited them methodically. Which meant there was something specific at Iron Vale worth protecting, something beyond the procurement fraud itself. The fraud was the mechanism, not the purpose. Elena turned that thought over, examining it from the angles she knew how to examine. She thought about the server room, the exfiltration device, the specific file categories Darby had identified, procurement records, access logs, authorization credentials, not patient data, not medical records, the documentation of who had authorized what and when and under what credentials. Cover tracks, she thought. That's what the exfiltration was for. Not intelligence gathering, track covering, which meant there was something in those records, something beyond Pruitt's procurement fraud, that the third person in the network needed to stay buried. She was still working through the shape of it when Ortega found her in the break room doorway, slightly out of breath, and with the expression of someone delivering news he hadn't processed yet. There's a situation in Bay 3, he said. Sergeant Farrow had been stable. His burn wounds were healing correctly. His vitals had been steady since the first dressing change. And by the previous morning's assessment, he'd been within 48 hours of transitioning to outpatient wound care. He was not supposed to be in distress. But when Elena reached Bay 3, he was heart rate elevated, blood pressure dropping in a pattern she recognized before she'd finished reading the monitor, a secondary infection presenting with the speed of something that had been building quietly under the surface of stable numbers and had decided all at once to stop being quiet. Septic cascade. Early stage, but moving fast. How long has he been showing these numbers? Elena asked Ortega, pulling on gloves without looking away from Farrow. 20 minutes, maybe. I caught it on the afternoon check. Did anyone pull blood cultures before I got here? I ordered them, Ortega said. Lab's running them. Good. She was already at the IV line, adjusting, her hands doing the things they knew how to do without requiring the part of her brain currently tracking 3 other things simultaneously. Get me broad spectrum. He's going to need it before we have culture results. And I need the surgical attending, not the resident. Whoever's on call. Now. Farrow looked up at her from the bed with the particular expression of a man who was frightened and was trying not to show it. He was young under the burns. 26, maybe 27, the age where men thought their bodies were invincible and then got surprised. Am I in trouble? He said. Some, she said honestly. But you caught it early and you're in good hands. Don't be dramatic about it. Something in his face relaxed slightly at that. The bluntness of it, the lack of reassuring performance. You always talk to patients like that? Only the ones who can handle it, she said. Keep still. She worked for the next 40 minutes with the complete focus that high acuity care required. The part of her brain that was tracking the investigation, the server room, the third credential, the shape of something she hadn't finished understanding, all of it going quiet and distant while the immediate problem in front of her had her full attention. This was the thing people who hadn't done this work didn't understand. The focus wasn't a choice. It wasn't discipline. It was the way the work itself demanded to be done, and you either learned to meet that demand or you didn't belong here. Elena had met it for 12 years. In this bay, in other bays, in places that had no bays at all, tents and vehicles and open ground with inadequate equipment and too much to do, and the specific knowledge that the person in front of you was the only thing that mattered right now. The surgical attending arrived, a woman named Dr. Pelena, compact and decisive, who assessed the situation in 30 seconds and made the same call Elena had made before she'd walked through the door. They worked efficiently, the way 2 competent people worked when they'd each done enough of this to skip the unnecessary communication and focus on what was actually being said. By the time Pharaoh was stabilized and the immediate crisis had resolved into the slower, managed business of treatment and monitoring, Elena was aware that she'd been in the bay for over an hour, and that the light through the high windows had continued to shift towards something that meant weather was coming. She stripped off her gloves at the scrub sink and caught her own reflection in the metal surface of the towel dispenser. Distorted, imprecise, which was fine. She didn't need to see herself clearly. She needed to finish thinking through the thing she'd been working on when Ortega interrupted her. The third credential. The physical visit 3 weeks ago. The specific categories of data the exfiltration tool had targeted. Authorization credentials. She stopped drying her hands. The exfiltration tool hadn't been pulling procurement records to sell them or use them. It had been pulling the access log data that linked the third credential to Iron Veil. Someone was trying to erase the evidence that a high-clearance individual had been physically present at this facility, not to hide the procurement fraud, but to hide what that person had been doing here that was separate from the fraud, which meant there was something here, not in the records, physically here. Something the third person had come to access or to move or to verify was still in place and hadn't finished before they'd had to leave. Elena thought about the facility map she'd been given on day 1. The discrepancies she'd noticed between the external stairwell access points and the listed egress routes. At the time, she'd filed it as a safety concern. Now she turned it over with different hands, examining what it meant that a facility map had been given to contractors with certain access points missing. Not an error. She was no longer willing to assume error. She looked up. Darby was in the corridor outside the bay, writing something on his tablet, which meant Voss's team was still working the administrative wing, and someone had thought to keep a presence on the medical floor. "Darby," she said. He looked up. "Has anyone done a physical sweep of the facility?" "Administrative areas and server infrastructure." "What about the sub-basement?" He paused. "That's outside the scope of the procurement investigation." "Somebody with a high clearance was physically inside this building 3 weeks ago," she said. "And the facility map given to contractors has 2 external access points missing from the sub-basement level." She watched him process that. If there's something here that isn't in the records, something that person came to manage in person, where would you put it? Darby stared at her for 3 full seconds. Then he reached for his radio. He didn't say anything into it right away. His expression had the look of someone reorganizing their understanding of what kind of situation they were standing inside. "I need to call Voss," he said. "I know," Elena said. "While you do, I'm going to the sub-basement. You shouldn't go alone." "No," she agreed. "I shouldn't." She was already moving toward the stairwell. She went through the door and started down, her steps quiet on the concrete stairs, her hand not touching the railing because she was listening to the quality of the air below her. Temperature, sound. The particular nothing of a space that hadn't had people in it recently versus the different kind of nothing of a space that had. She reached the sub-basement landing and pushed through the door. The generator room was to her left, dark, the emergency lighting casting a flat yellow band along the base of the wall. Storage on the right, metal shelving with labeled crates. The corridor ahead ran to a maintenance junction that connected the building's mechanical systems. She moved toward the junction, and then she stopped. The floor, concrete old, with the particular scuff marks of equipment being moved over it periodically. Maintenance work. But here, in front of the junction door, the scuff pattern was wrong, too recent, too concentrated, and coming from something heavier than standard maintenance equipment. She crouched and looked more carefully at the door itself. The hinges were standard. The lock was standard. The dust pattern on the upper frame was not. There was a clean line where something had disrupted it recently, at the height of a person's hand reaching up to check the frame from the inside. From the inside. Someone had been in there, had come out, had checked the frame on their way out, the kind of habitual check you made after you'd secured something. Elena put her hand on the door handle and turned it. The door opened inward onto a maintenance junction exactly as the facility map showed. Generator conduits, water lines, the junction panel for the building's secondary electrical system, all of it exactly where it should be. Except for the metal case bolted to the back of a conduit housing, painted the same gray as the housing itself, secured with a lock that did not match the facility's standard key system and had no dust on it whatsoever. She did not touch it. She stood very still, looking at it, the shape of the thing she'd been working toward for the past several hours finally complete. Whatever was in that case, files, drives, something physical that required this location, this facility, this particular combination of remote geography and institutional access. It was the reason the third person had come to Ironvale. It was the reason the exfiltration tool had targeted authorization credentials to erase the evidence of that visit. It was the reason the facility map was missing the access points that led to this room. It was also the reason that if the wrong people learned she'd found it before Voss had secured the building and run a proper sweep, Elena Marsh was no longer just an inconvenient contractor who'd noticed a procurement irregularity. She heard the sub-basement door open above her on the stairs. Footsteps coming down. One person, moving carefully, which was not the sound of Darby or anyone from Voss's team, because Voss's team moved with the deliberate, unhurried confidence of people who were authorized to be wherever they were going. This person was trying to be quiet. Elena stepped to the side of the junction door, out of the direct line from the stairwell, and put her back against the conduit housing. The case with no dust on its lock was 6 inches to her left. The footsteps reached the sub-basement landing, paused. Then the door to the sub-basement opened, and in the flat yellow emergency light, she saw the third man, the one from this morning she hadn't been able to account for after the escort job was done. He was carrying something in his right hand that was not a tablet or a radio. He hadn't seen her yet. He was looking at the junction door, which she had left open 6 inches, and his face had the expression of a man who had arrived to find a situation he needed to resolve quickly. Elena exhaled once, slow and controlled, and weighed her options in the space of a breath. The sub-basement had 1 exit to the stairwell and 2 external access points that weren't on the facility map. The man with the object in his right hand was between her and the stairwell. And somewhere above her, Darby was calling Voss, and Voss was 30 seconds, or 3 minutes, or 5 minutes away, which in this particular moment was a difference that mattered enormously. She moved first, not toward the stairwell, not toward the man, but laterally, 2 steps along the conduit housing, putting the junction door fully between herself and his line of sight before he'd registered the movement as intentional. The emergency lighting worked in her favor, the flat yellow washing. Everything into shadows with soft edges, the kind of light that played tricks on depth perception and made people hesitant half a beat longer than normal. That half beat was enough. He came through the junction door with the object raised and found empty space where he'd expected to find her, and the fraction of a second it took him to recalibrate was the fraction she needed to close the distance from the side. She caught the wrist of his right hand with both of hers and drove it up and back against the conduit housing, hard. The object, a taser, she registered, not a firearm, which told her something important about what his instructions were, clattered against the concrete floor and skidded into the shadows under the waterline housing. He was bigger than the man from the server room and faster, about recovering from surprise. He got his left elbow into her ribs before she'd fully controlled the wrist, and it landed with enough force to knock her breath sideways. She'd had worse. She kept the wrist locked, rotated it past the point where fighting back was biomechanically useful, and used his own forward momentum to push him face first into the conduit housing. He grunted. She had maybe 3 seconds before he got his feet under him properly. "Stop," she said, quiet and flat and very close to his ear. "I have one arm, and I can break the other one before you get turned around. Think about whether that's what you want." He stopped. His breathing was fast and his body was coiled, and she could feel him making the calculation. Whether she was actually capable of what she'd said versus whether it was a bluff, she was counting on him not to test. She wasn't bluffing. He must have read that in the quality of the grip, because after 4 seconds he let out a long breath through his nose and his shoulders dropped 2 degrees. "Hands," she said. He put them against the conduit housing. She stepped back, putting herself between him and the taser on the floor. "Who sent you down here?" she asked. "Nothing." "Not Pruitt," she said. "Pruitt's been locked out of facility systems since 9 this morning, and he's been in Briggs's conference room for the last 4 hours. So somebody else told you about this room." She looked at the case bolted to the back of the housing, still gray, still no dust. "Somebody who knew what's in that case and needed it moved before the sweep team got here." Still nothing from him. The silence of someone who had made a professional decision about information. Above them, she heard the sub-basement door open and feet on the stairs. More than one person, moving the way Voss's team moved, unhurried and coordinated. "Down here," Elena called. "Well, Darby came through first, then a second agent she hadn't met, then Voss herself, who took in the scene in a single sweep, the man against the conduit housing, Elena standing with her arms loose at her sides, the taser on the floor in the shadows, and didn't say anything for a moment. "He came for the case," Elena said. She gestured toward it without moving closer. Voss crossed to it, looked at the lock, looked at the gray paint, looked at the placement. Her expression was carefully controlled, but something moved behind her eyes. "Do not touch it," she said, to no one specifically. Then, to the second agent, "Get EOD protocol on the phone and get me a hazmat assessment team. Now. Tell them sub-basement access, unknown container, high clearance adjacent." The second agent was already moving back toward the stairs. Voss turned to Elena. "How did you find it?" "Dust patterns on the floor, the door frame. Someone had been in here recently and wasn't trying to hide the physical evidence particularly well. They were counting on nobody looking." She paused. "The facility map was wrong. The access points down here aren't listed." "You noticed that on day one?" "I noticed everything on day one," Elena said. "I didn't know what it meant until this afternoon." Voss looked at the man with his hands against the conduit housing. His face was turned toward the wall and giving nothing. "Do you know him?" "He was one of the 3 who escorted me out this morning. I made him for private contractor. Wrong clothing for military. Wrong movement pattern for law enforcement." Voss circled him once, slowly, like she was cataloging. "He's neither," she said finally. "He's the 3rd name on my list." Elena went still. "Not the high clearance principal," Voss clarified. "The one in the middle, the connection between Pruitt's network and whoever is above it." She said it without looking at Elena, still studying the man. "He's been operating inside at least 4 of the 14 facilities. We had a flag on him, but we didn't have his location." "He walked himself into your investigation," Elena said. "Somebody panicked," Voss said. "When your documentation package came in, somebody at a level above Pruitt made a decision to sanitize this facility before we could sweep it. That decision required sending someone physically, which means whoever is above this operation was more afraid of what's in that case than they were careful about exposure." Elena looked at the case. Gray paint, no dust, a lock that didn't match the facility's key system. "What's in it?" she asked. "I don't know yet," Voss said. And from her tone, Elena understood that this was a real answer, not a deflection. Voss genuinely didn't know, and that was part of what was making her careful. They cleared the sub-basement and waited for the hazmat team and EOD, which took 45 minutes and arrived in the form of 3 specialists and a protocol that involved a portable X-ray unit, a remote access tool for evaluating lock mechanisms, and enough caution that the entire east wing of the facility was quietly asked to restrict movement to essential personnel. Elena spent the 45 minutes in the corridor outside the sub-basement door, not because she'd been told to wait there, but because standing near the stairwell gave her a clear line of sight to the entrance and the first 2 corridors of the main wing, and because it turned out she had things to think through and motion helped. The case was the center of it, but the case was also a symptom. You didn't bolt a locked case to a conduit housing in a military medical facility's sub-basement and then run an $11 million procurement fraud network as a cover story because you were trying to hide paperwork. The scale was wrong. The structure was wrong. The level of the 3rd credential, high enough that flagging it sent notifications somewhere Voss didn't control, was wrong for a fraud case. She thought about what Voss had said, more afraid of what's in that case than they were careful about exposure. Fear at that level, in people who operated at that level, was calibrated. It wasn't irrational. If the principal above Pruitt's network had made a decision to send someone to sanitize this facility, and made it fast, within hours of Voss's team arriving, then whatever was in that case was something that justified that risk calculation, something that couldn't be retrieved remotely, something physical, something that would survive discovery and be usable by whoever found it. Evidence, she thought, not of the fraud. Evidence of something the fraud was designed to fund or facilitate or conceal. Something that required physical storage at this location, this specific facility, a military medical center in a remote corner of Montana with limited oversight and a cooperative administrator who believed categorization errors and didn't ask follow-up questions. She was still working through it when Voss came up the stairs and said, "It's clear. Come look at this." The case held 4 items. They were laid out on a portable examination surface the EOD team had set up, a flat light table that made everything on it sharply visible. The first was a hard drive, standard military-grade encrypted storage, the kind issued to cleared personnel for sensitive operational documentation. The second was a physical ledger, actual paper, which was unusual and deliberate, paper being non-hackable and non-remotely accessible. The third was a set of 6 access cards on a single ring, the kind used for facility entry systems, each with a different facility code embossed on the back. Elena scanned them. She recognized 2 of the facility codes from the network diagram Voss had shown her that afternoon. The fourth item was a photograph, printed on standard paper, the kind you printed when you didn't want a digital file to exist. It showed 2 men at what appeared to be an outdoor location, a parking area, unremarkable, the kind of place that was chosen for meetings because it looked like nothing. One of the men she didn't recognize, the other she did, though she hadn't seen his face in several years. She kept her expression level. "Who's the man on the left?" she asked Voss. Voss looked at her for a moment before answering. "Colonel Richard Sauer, Defense Logistics Agency, Acquisitions Division. He's the high clearance principal." Elena nodded once. The man on the right in the photograph was someone she knew from a context that had no official record. A mission in a location she couldn't name to a person she wasn't going to name here, in a sub-basement with 2 EOD specialists and a federal investigator standing close enough to hear everything. "And the right?" she asked. "We're working on identification," Voss said carefully, which meant they hadn't identified him yet, or they had and weren't saying. Elena looked at the photograph for another few seconds and then looked away. Her hands were still. Her breathing was even. "The ledger," she said. "Has anyone opened it?" "First 2 pages, it's transaction records, dates, amounts, facility codes. The amounts don't match the procurement disbursements." "Larger or smaller?" "Larger," Voss said, "by a significant margin." Elena recalibrated again. The procurement fraud was the operational layer, the mechanism for moving authorized money through ghost vendors. But if there were separate transaction records in a physical ledger with larger amounts and the same facility codes, then the fraud wasn't the primary function. It was the cover. The money being moved through Meridian Med Group and the other 8 ghost entities was the visible layer, the one sized to stay below audit threshold, the one designed to be found if someone looked hard enough because finding it was supposed to be the end of the investigation. The ledger was the actual operation. "You need a forensic accountant with defense appropriations experience," Elena said. "I have one," Voss said. "She's in Billings. I'm getting her here tonight. And the hard drive. Our technical team is already on it. The encryption is military grade, but we have the resources." Elena looked at the access cards. 6 facilities, 6 codes. "Have you notified the other facilities in the network?" "The ones we've identified. Some of them." Voss paused. "The complication is that if Colonel Sauer's credential sends notifications when flagged, anyone in his network who receives those notifications is also going to know we've moved on the case. Some of those people are inside institutions we haven't identified yet. You're telling me this investigation is going to compress fast?" "Very fast," Voss said. "Whatever is going to happen, it happens in the next 12 to 24 hours. After that, people start making calls and moving, and the case either holds together or it doesn't." She said it to Elena directly, which was interesting. Voss had no particular reason to brief her on the investigation's timeline. She was a contractor, not a member of the team. Her role had been to provide initial documentation and then, presumably, stay out of the way. But she hadn't stayed out of the way, and Voss had stopped expecting her to. "What do you need?" Elena asked. "The photograph," Voss said. "The man on the right." "You recognized him." Elena met her eyes. A long moment passed between them. "My background is classified," Elena said. "I know. I'm not asking for your file." Voss kept her voice level. "I'm asking if you know who he is and whether it affects the security of this investigation." The distinction was precise. Not tell me his name, not give me your file. Whether knowing him created a risk to what was being built in this sub-basement. Elena thought about that for exactly as long as it deserved. "Not the investigation," she said finally, "but it affects how Sauer is going to react when the flag goes up." "In what way?" "He's going to know the case has someone in it who can contextualize that photograph, which means he's going to move faster than you're expecting him to." Voss absorbed that. "How much faster?" Tonight, Elena said. Not tomorrow. Voss moved the timeline. Elena watched her do it with the efficiency of someone who had run enough of these to know that a compressed timeline meant accepting imperfect conditions, which meant deciding in the next 90 minutes which elements of the case were solid enough to move on and which ones needed more time than they now had. It was not a clean set of decisions. Voss made them anyway, standing in the sub-basement corridor with her phone and a tablet, and 3 agents who kept bringing her pieces of information she folded into the next call without pause. Elena stayed near enough to hear and far enough not to be in the way. At 7:43 in the evening, 2 additional vehicles arrived at Ironvale. These ones with federal plates, not civilian, and with a team of 4 that included a JAG officer Elena identified by the uniform before anyone made introductions. The presence of JAG meant the military justice layer was now formally engaged, which meant someone had made a decision about the chain of custody for anything found in this facility with operational military implications. Pruitt, who had been sitting in Briggs's conference room for most of the day, under the informal and technically voluntary supervision of one of Voss's agents, became formally less voluntary at 8:15. He did not take this calmly either, but by this point his options had narrowed considerably, and the version of outrage he produced was smaller and more frightened than the performance from the morning. Elena was not in the conference room for any of it. She was on the medical floor because Farrow's condition needed a 4-hour check, and because Ortega, who'd been holding the nursing floor together through a day that had been significantly stranger than anyone had planned for, needed someone to confirm the overnight care orders before the shift change. She was standing at the station reviewing the night shift handoff when Donna appeared beside her with the expression of someone who had spent the day processing a great deal and was not entirely finished. "Pruitt's being taken out," Donna said. "In the front entrance. I watched it from the corridor window." "I know," Elena said. He had this look on his face. Donna seemed to be working out how to describe it, like he couldn't figure out where he'd gone wrong. He went wrong when he decided the institution existed to serve him instead of the other way around, Elena said. Donna was quiet for a moment. "The patients, Farrow, the others in the ward, they're going to hear things, probably have already." "Yes." "Should we?" "Do the work," Elena said. "That's all. The rest gets handled by the right people." It was the simplest answer and the most accurate one, and Donna seemed to understand that, because she nodded once and went back to her desk. Elena finished the handoff orders and went to check on Farrow. He was awake, running a low fever that was expected and manageable, his forearm in the elevated position she'd specified, and the IV running the broad-spectrum antibiotic properly. He looked at her with the eyes of a man who'd spent the day in a bed in a facility where things had clearly happened and who'd had nothing to do but lie there and imagine what. "You okay?" he asked. "I am," she said. She checked the IV line, the dressing, the monitor numbers, all of it in order. Word is there were federal agents in the building all day. Word is correct. Is the facility okay? Like, are we safe here? She looked at him. 26, maybe 27, lying in a bed with a burn on his forearm and a secondary infection that they'd caught in time, and underneath the toughness that military service built into people. He was asking the same question anyone asked when the institution they trusted turned out to have something wrong inside it. "The problem is being addressed," she said. "You're safe." She paused. "Get some sleep. The fever will peak around 2 in the morning and then it'll come down." "How do you know?" "Because that's what septic cascades at this stage do." She adjusted his blanket, not from softness exactly, but from the same practical attention she gave everything. "Try to drink the water, not just let it sit there." He looked at the untouched cup on the bedside table. "Yeah," he said. "Okay." She was at the bay door when he said quietly, "Hey, Marsh." She stopped. "I heard what Pruitt did. First day you got here, and then all of it." He was looking at the ceiling, not at her. "I didn't say anything. I should have said something." The admission cost him something. She could hear it. "You were a patient," she said. That's not your job." Still, she considered it. "If you want to do something with it, when you're out of here, say something the next time, to whoever comes next." She looked at him. "That's all it takes. Just say something." She left before he could respond. At 9:47 in the evening, Voss found her in the break room again. The coffee was fresh this time. Someone on the night shift had made a real pot, and Elena had a full cup that was still hot. Voss sat down. She looked tired in a functional way, the kind of tired that didn't affect performance but showed up in the set of the shoulders and the economy of movement going slightly more economical. Sauer's credential was flagged at 8:52, she said. The notification went out at 9:01. That's 49 minutes ago, Elena said. Yes. Have you heard anything? His last confirmed location was Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington. He flew commercial to Billings 2 days ago under a secondary credential. Voss set her phone on the table between them, screen up. He hasn't used any registered transport since, which means he has resources we haven't mapped. He's moving, Elena said. Almost certainly. Toward what? Voss looked at her phone. The ledger, the hard drive, the photograph. She looked up. Everything in that case. If he gets to it before our forensic team finishes the chain of custody documentation, he can challenge the evidentiary integrity, Elena said. Cast doubt on the provenance. At minimum. At maximum. She didn't finish. Elena understood the maximum. Someone with a high enough clearance moving fast with resources that weren't mapped had options that went beyond legal challenge. You need to move the case, Elena said. It's already in transit. Left the facility 40 minutes ago under armed escort. Voss leaned back. But Sauer might not know that yet, which means if his resources tell him the case is still here. She stopped. Both of them heard it at the same moment. Not a sound from inside the building. A sound from outside it. The specific quality of a vehicle moving on the access road with its lights off, which produced a particular absence of the ambient noise that a lit vehicle produced, a negative space in the sound of the night. Voss was on her feet and at the window before Elena had set down her coffee. Through the break room's exterior window, at the far edge of the facility's perimeter where the contractor parking lot met the access road, 2 vehicles had stopped. No headlights. 3 figures moving from the vehicles toward the east wing's exterior, moving toward the external access points that weren't on the facility map, toward the sub-basement. They don't know the case is gone, Elena said. Voss already had her radio up. All units, east perimeter. 2 vehicles, 3 individuals, moving on the external access points to the lower level. We need... The facility's power went out. Not a partial outage. Total. Overhead lights, monitoring systems. The hum of the HVAC cutting to silence all at once. The emergency lighting kicked in on the 3-second delay. The flat yellow bands at floor level. The same yellow she'd seen in the sub-basement, turning the break room into a different place. Somewhere in the building, a door opened. Voss's radio produced static, and then nothing. She looked at Elena in the emergency light with the expression of someone who had just understood that the situation had escalated past the version she'd planned for. They jammed the communications, Elena said. It wasn't a question. Locally, yes. Voss tried her phone. Cell is still up. They'll have accounted for that. Probably. Voss was moving toward the break room door. I have 4 agents in this building and a JAG officer who is not tactical. What do I have in you? It was the most direct question anyone had asked her in 4 years. Elena set down the coffee cup. Where are your agents positioned? 2 in the administrative wing, 1 at the stairwell on the 3rd floor, 1 with the JAG officer in the conference room. None on the medical floor. No. Elena thought about Pharaoh in Bay 3 with a fever that was going to peak at 2 in the morning. Thought about Donna at the nursing station and Ortega running supply checks. Thought about the other patients in the East Wing ward, some of them mobile and some of them not, and all of them in the path between the external access point and the sub-basement. The patients need to move, she said, away from the East Wing, the interior corridor to the West Wing. It's not connected to the external access points, and it has its own emergency lighting circuit. Can you do that? Yes. She was already thinking through the sequence. But I need 10 minutes minimum, and I need someone covering the east stairwell because that's the most direct route from the external access to the medical floor. I can pull 1 agent from administrative. Do it now. Voss was on her phone before she finished the sentence. Elena moved out of the break room and into the emergency-lit corridor, heading for the medical floor at the fast, purposeful walk that was faster than it looked and quieter than running. She hit the nursing station and Donna looked up from a battery-powered work light she'd already found, because Donna was good at this work and said, "What do I do?" "We're moving the ambulatory patients to the West Wing interior corridor. Now calmly, no running. I need you and Ortega to start with the ward." She grabbed the charge nurse's emergency kit from under the station. "Pharaoh is not ambulatory yet. I'll handle Bay 3. "Elena, what is happening?" "I'll explain it when everyone is safe." She was already moving. "Go." She went to Pharaoh. He was sitting up in the bed, alert. The way soldiers went alert when they felt a situation shift, even from a hospital bed with an IV in their arm. "The lights. Tss. We're moving you," she said. "Can you stand with support?" "Yeah." He was already pulling at the blanket. She got the IV pole positioned, got her shoulder under his arm, and they moved out of Bay 3 and into the corridor, Pharaoh's feet finding their steadiness faster than she'd hoped. Behind her, she could hear Donna's voice, calm and clear, moving through the ward. They were halfway to the West Wing junction when she heard it, the sound of the external access door in the east stairwell opening. The sound traveled in the empty, quiet building with the particular clarity of a space that had lost all its background noise. Not one person, at least two, moving up the stairwell toward the medical floor. Elena recalculated in one breath. The West Wing junction was 40 feet ahead. She could get Pharaoh there in 30 seconds. The stairwell door to the medical floor was 20 feet behind her, 20 feet, and Donna and Ortega were still in the ward with 3 patients who weren't moving fast. "Keep going," she told Pharaoh. "Straight ahead, through the junction door. Don't stop." "Where are you?" "Going back," she said. She let go of his arm and turned around. The stairwell door was still closed. She could hear movement behind it, not rushing, controlled, the movement of people who thought they were moving through a building where they had the advantage of darkness and surprise. They were wrong about the second one. She put herself against the wall beside the stairwell door, in the flat emergency light shadow, and she heard the latch begin to move, and she thought very briefly and clearly about everything that had brought her to this particular corridor at this particular moment. And then she stopped thinking about it because the door was opening and there was no more time for anything except the next few seconds. The first figure came through the door, and from somewhere in the facility below her, from the sub-basement level, from the direction of the external access points, she heard a sound that stopped everything in its tracks. A shot, single, contained. Then Voss's voice on someone's phone, audible through the stillness of the jammed building, sharp, controlled, issuing a command Elena could not quite make out. Then silence. The figure in the doorway heard it too. He hesitated. 1/2 second, the half second she'd been waiting for. She moved. She took him down in 4 seconds. Not cleanly. Nothing in a dark corridor with emergency lighting and an IV pole 3 feet away was going to be clean, but effectively. The figure came through the stairwell door already off balance from the hesitation, and she used that, redirecting his forward momentum into the wall beside the door frame, hard enough that his shoulder took the impact and his body followed it down. She controlled the descent, kept it quiet, and had his hands pinned behind him before the second figure on the stairs had time to process what had happened to the first. The second one stopped. She could hear him on the other side of the door, not moving forward, not moving back. Waiting. She used the first man's own jacket to bind his wrists, improvised and imperfect but functional, and moved away from the door before the second figure made a decision. He made the wrong one. He came through fast, which was aggressive and understandable, and exactly what she'd positioned herself for. She stepped inside the reach of his arm, took the momentum, and put him down alongside the first. He hit his head on the floor with a sound she didn't like, checked him fast with 2 fingers at his neck, pulse present, strong, he'd have a headache and nothing worse, and stepped back, both of them down. The corridor was quiet again. Her ribs hurt where the first man had gotten his elbow in the sub-basement. Not broken, she knew the difference, but the kind of hurt that would make itself known for the next week every time she breathed deep. She breathed shallow for now, and moved to the West Wing junction. Donna was there with Ortega and 3 patients, and the expression of someone who had been holding herself together through significant will and was still holding. "Everyone accounted for?" Elena asked. 4 patients in the ward. Mrs. Halstead can't be moved without a wheelchair. Ortega went back for it. "Where's Ortega now?" "Should be." He came through the junction door from the ward side, slightly out of breath, pushing a manual wheelchair with a small elderly woman in it who looked more alert than alarmed and was holding her blanket around herself with the focused dignity of someone who had decided that whatever was happening, she was not going to be undignified about it. Ortega, Elena said. There are two individuals down in the east corridor outside the stairwell door, both conscious. I need you to stay at this junction and not let anyone through from that direction unless it's Voss's team. How do I know which is which? Voss's people will identify themselves. The others won't. She looked at him directly. If anyone comes through who doesn't identify, you push this junction door shut and you get everyone further into the West Wing. Don't try to be a hero about it. Got it, he said. His voice was steady. Good. She moved back into the East Wing. The administrative wing was where Voss had concentrated her team, and the sound of the shot she'd heard, single, contained, from the sub-basement level, had come from that direction. Elena took the central corridor at speed, staying close to the wall on the side away from the exterior windows, and found two of Voss's agents at the entrance to the administrative wing, with a third figure between them who was seated on the floor with a federal restraint on his wrists, and the particular stillness of someone who had done a calculation and decided cooperation was currently the better outcome. One of the agents she recognized from the parking lot that morning. Agent Rourke, she said, where's Voss? Sub-basement. Third individual came through the lower access. She engaged. He looked at her. You good? Two more down in the east corridor, stairwell side. Secured, not medically compromised. She kept moving. Marsh. She was already at the sub-basement door. Voss was at the bottom of the stairs with her phone's flashlight up and a graze on her left forearm that was bleeding through the sleeve of her jacket at a rate that needed attention. She was talking, low and fast, into the phone with the arm that worked, while across the sub-basement landing, a fourth individual was secured against the wall with actual federal restraints, and the expression of someone whose night had gone considerably worse than planned. Voss looked up when Elena came through the door. Her face had the controlled tightness of someone managing pain without acknowledging it. Elena crossed to her, pulled the emergency kit she'd grabbed from the nursing station, and started on the arm without asking permission. Voss didn't stop her. She kept talking into the phone while Elena cut the jacket sleeve away and assessed a graze, as she'd read from the stairs, not deep but long, across the outer aspect of the left forearm. It had bled considerably, but it was clean and the structures beneath were intact. I need to close this, Elena said quietly, between Voss's sentences. Voss nodded, shifted the phone to speaker, and held her arm still. Professional, pragmatic, the kind of patient Elena preferred. She worked while Voss finished the call. The person on the other end was issuing authorizations, facility lockdown, federal air transport, something about a secondary team from the IG field office in Denver being rerouted. Voss confirmed again, and disconnected. The shot was his, Voss said, watching Elena close the wound. He got it off before I made entry, hit the conduit housing. She glanced toward the junction room. The case was already gone. He figured that out after about 30 seconds of looking. When I came through the door, he was deciding what to do about it. Did he say anything? He said he had authorization for everything he was doing. She paused. They all say that. Do any of them ever actually have it? Sometimes, Voss said. That's the complicated part. She watched Elena apply the closure strips and the pressure dressing. You have medical training beyond nursing. Trauma nursing covers a lot of ground. Yes, Voss said. It does. She didn't push further, which was its own form of respect. Elena finished the dressing, checked it, and packed the kit. Her ribs complained when she stood up. She didn't let it show. You're two in the east corridor, Strump. Corridor? They're not talking? Voss asked. No. The one from the server room earlier might, if he thinks it benefits him. The others are operating on professional silence. That'll change, Voss said, once they understand what they're facing and who's facing it alongside them. She picked up her phone again. Sauer's credential was used to access a domestic travel booking system at 9:17 tonight. Private charter, origin billings, destination logged as Portland. He's running. He's trying to. Voss looked at the phone for a moment. The charter company has been contacted. The aircraft is being held, but Sauer hasn't appeared for his departure slot. Which means he knows it's compromised, Elena said. Which means he has another route. Almost certainly. Voss exhaled. We have the ledger, we have the drive, we have 4 of his operational people in custody. If he gets out of the country before the drive is decrypted, he doesn't disappear, Elena said. The photograph puts him with someone whose activities are documented in contexts that overlap with whatever is on that drive. The ledger is physical evidence that survives his absence. She said it carefully, neither more nor less than she meant. He won't be comfortable wherever he goes. Voss looked at her. Another of those long, assessing looks that she did without making them feel hostile. The man in the photograph, the one on the right. You said knowing him told you how Sauer would react. Yes. It told you he'd move tonight instead of tomorrow. Yes. And you were right. A pause. How did you know him? Elena looked at the junction room, the empty space where the case had been, the gray paint on the conduit housing. From work, she said. A long time ago. Voss absorbed that and let it sit. She wasn't going to push past what Elena was willing to give, which meant she was either professionally disciplined or she'd already guessed enough of the shape of the answer to know that pushing wouldn't get her more than she already had. Probably both. Come upstairs, Voss said. There's more you need to see. The administrative wing at 11 in the evening looked like the aftermath of something that had been building for a long time. 2 of Voss's agents were at workstations with the facility's servers back online. The jamming had stopped when the 4th individual in the sub-basement was secured, running through the authorization logs with the focused intensity of people who knew exactly what they were looking for, now that the exfiltration attempt had told them which threads were worth pulling. Briggs was in his office, door open, sitting at his desk with the look of a man who understood for the first time in a long time where he actually sat in the chain of events surrounding him. A JAG officer was with him, a captain named Aldrin, trim and precise, with the bearing of someone who delivered institutional consequences for a living and had stopped finding it emotionally complicated. Pruitt was in the conference room. He was in the conference room alone, which was the detail that mattered. The agent who'd been with him had been pulled to cover the East Wing when the power went out, and in the confusion of those minutes, no one had been specifically detailed back to him. He was not restrained. He had a phone, his personal cell, which was not under seizure because his formal status was still witness pending rather than subject in custody, a distinction that had seemed bureaucratically reasonable 4 hours ago. Elena looked through the conference room window as she passed and registered all of this in the half-second it took to walk by the door. She stopped, turned back. Pruitt was on the phone. She opened the conference room door. He looked up fast, the look of someone caught mid-act, which he was. The phone was against his ear. His face went through 3 things in rapid sequence. Surprise, the attempt to recover to authority, and then something underneath both that was closer to the expression she'd read on the face of the man in the sub-basement. The calculation of outcomes. End the call, she said. You can't end it, she said. Now. Something in her voice, not loud, not aggressive, just final, made him do it. He took the phone from his ear and set it on the conference table. His hand didn't shake, which she noted as the last piece of composure he had left. She crossed the room and picked up the phone. The screen showed a recent call, 7 minutes ago, 43 seconds in duration. The contact was listed as a name she didn't recognize, but the number had a Washington, D.C. area code. She walked the phone out to Darby, who was nearest. Recent calls, she said, 7 minutes ago. Darby looked at the screen and his jaw set. He took the phone and moved toward Voss without another word. The number Pruitt had called from the conference room resolved through the kind of trace that required federal authority and took 40 minutes rather than the instant television version, to a personal cell registered to an aide in the Defense Logistics Agency's Acquisitions Division. The aide worked directly under Colonel Richard Sauer. Pruitt had spent 43 seconds telling someone in Sauer's immediate orbit that the case had been seized, that federal agents were in the building, and that the situation was, in whatever words he'd used, compromised. He had done this while under informal federal supervision from a phone that should have been collected 3 hours earlier, through an oversight that nobody was proud of, and Voss addressed with her team in the direct and non-performative way she seemed to address most things. It doesn't change the case, she said to Darby, to Rourke, to the agents at the workstations. At 1 in the morning, in the facility's administrative conference room while Pruitt sat in the building's security office, under someone's direct observation, and the Montana night outside was very still. Sauer already knew we were moving. The call confirms he knew the case was gone and tells us the aide is a secondary contact in the network. We follow it. She looked around the room. What changes is the timeline on the aide. We move on that in the morning, not later. Elena was at the back of the room, leaning against the wall, and Voss looked at her when she finished. Pruitt talked, Voss said, which means he's decided cooperation looks better than silence. He never did well with silence, Elena said. No. Voss looked at the table, at the documentation spread across it, the network diagrams, the ledger photographs her forensic accountant had transmitted from Billings where the physical ledger had arrived 2 hours ago, the preliminary decryption notes on the hard drive. He's going to give us the operational structure, who gave him instructions, how the disbursements were routed, who else inside the facilities had knowledge. She paused. He's going to give us everything, because he's the kind of person who mistakes information for protection. Does it protect him? Elena asked. Some, Voss said honestly. Less than he thinks, but some. The forensic accountant arrived from Billings at 2 in the morning, a woman named Casper, who drove 3 hours on a mountain road in the dark and came through Ironvale's entrance with a laptop case over one shoulder and the brisk directed energy of someone who'd been handed interesting data and was impatient to get to it. She set up at a workstation in the administrative wing and started on the ledger photographs within 15 minutes. Elena watched her work for a while from the doorway. Casper had a way of moving through numbers that reminded her of the way good surgeons move through procedure. No wasted motion, no hesitation at the decision points. The particular rhythm of someone who had done the thing enough times that it had its own internal logic she could follow in real time without having to reconstruct it step by step. At 2:47 in the morning, Casper looked up from the workstation with an expression that wasn't quite surprise. She was too experienced for surprise, but was the thing just below it. I need Voss, she said. Voss was there in 3 minutes. Elena stayed in the doorway. The secondary transactions in the ledger, Casper said, not preamble, just information. They're not moving money through the ghost vendor network. They're disbursements against a separate mechanism, something that looks like a contract research fund, categorized under a military medical research budget line. Research into what? Voss asked. The ledger codes don't specify, but the receiving entities, I've traced 3 of them. She pointed to the screen. They're not medical research companies. 2 are logistics and 1 is a private security contractor with overseas operations. She looked up at Voss. The money being moved through Pruitt's network wasn't funding the fraud. It was funding something else, and the fraud was the bookkeeping mechanism for moving it below visibility. Voss was very still. Elena straightened from the doorway. What is the private security contractor? She asked. Both women looked at her. She crossed to the workstation and read the name on the screen. She stood there for a moment. The name meant something, not from her nursing career, from the other part of her history, the documented version of which lived in classified files she hadn't accessed in 4 years and didn't need to access to know what that company was, what it did, what kinds of operations it ran, and in what parts of the world it had been active during the period when she had been active in some of the same places. Voss? She said. Her voice was level. The man in the photograph. On the right. Yes. His name is Garrett Lund. He ran Black Site Logistics for a program that was officially discontinued in 2019. She said it carefully, each word placed. Officially. Voss didn't move. The room was very quiet. This private security contractor, Elena continued, pointing at the screen. 3 years ago, it absorbed a shell company that was the operational successor to the logistics division Lund ran. She looked at Voss directly. Which means the money being moved through Pruitt's facilities wasn't funding a research program. It was funding resumed operations of something that was supposed to have been shut down. Casper was very still at her workstation, looking at her screen and deliberately not looking at either of them. Do you know what the program was? Voss asked. Some of it, Elena said. The parts I'm cleared to know, which is probably less than what's on that hard drive. Voss sat down in the chair beside Casper's workstation. It was the first time Elena had seen her sit heavily, the weight of the day and what the day had just become settling into the posture of someone recalibrating against a problem that was considerably larger than where they'd started. The IG office handles procurement fraud, Voss said. What you're describing goes into territory that involves the intelligence community and possibly the oversight committee. I know. Which means this case, as of tonight, stops being mine. Possibly, Elena said, but the chain of custody for everything found in this facility is yours. The ledger, the drive, the photograph, the 4 individuals in custody. She looked at Voss steadily. Those don't stop being yours because someone decides the implications are inconvenient. A long silence. The fluorescent lights hummed. Casper's fingers moved on her keyboard without looking up. Garrett Lund, Voss said. Is he the man who came to this facility 3 weeks ago? I don't know, Elena said honestly. I wasn't here 3 weeks ago, but the access credential that brought someone to this facility 3 weeks ago belongs to Sauer, and if Sauer and Lund are connected through that security contractor, then whoever came here 3 weeks ago was connected to the resumed operation, Voss finished, and whatever they accessed or deposited in that case was operational material. Yes. The drive, Voss said. If the decryption team gets through the encryption tonight, it'll tell you what the operation was, Elena said. Not just who funded it. Voss looked at her phone. It was 3:14 in the morning. Outside the window, Montana was dark and cold, and the facility sat in it like a lit square against the mountain backdrop. I'm going to make a call, Voss said, to a person in my chain who is high enough to take what you just told me and make a decision about which box it lives in. She looked at Elena. While I do that, I need you to write down every specific piece of what you know, the program, Lund, the connection. Dated, sourced to your own knowledge. Nothing you're not cleared to write. I know what I can put on paper, Elena said. I know you do. Voss stood up. There's a workstation at the end of the row. It's not connected to the facility's system. It's running on our secure network. Elena sat down at the workstation and opened a blank document. She wrote for 40 minutes. She wrote with the precision she'd learned to use for operational debriefs. No editorializing, no interpretation beyond the direct line from fact to fact, the dates and names and connections laid out with the economy of someone who knew that clarity mattered more than completeness, and that anything she couldn't source directly was worse than leaving it out. When she was done, she read it through once, changed 2 words, and saved it. At 4 in the morning, the hard drive decryption produced its first accessible files. Darby came to get her from the workstation and didn't say anything on the way to the server where the technical agent was working, which told her the files were significant. Technical people who worked intelligence adjacent got quiet in specific ways when they encountered specific categories of material. The first readable files were operational logs, dated entries, location codes, personnel identifiers. They were formatted in a way that Elena recognized because she'd seen the format before, in a context she'd hoped was sealed and finished. They were not dated from the recent past. They were dated from the coming months, not historical records of a resumed operation. Planning documents for one. Targets, logistics, a resource allocation schedule that included the funds being moved through Pruitt's facility network, something that hadn't happened yet. Voss was there. She read the dates and looked at Elena. They weren't covering their past, she said. No, Elena said. They were funding something that's still coming. The words settled in the room with the specific weight of things that couldn't be taken back once they were understood. And then Darby's phone, the personal cell he'd kept operational through the jamming because it ran on a different carrier than the facility's communications, received a message that he read with 2 quick passes and then held out to Voss without a word. Voss read it. Her face did the thing faces did when the ground shifted. Sauer made contact with the oversight committee, she said, 40 minutes ago. He's claiming he came forward voluntarily to report an unauthorized IG investigation that compromised an active classified operation. She set the phone on the table. He's trying to flip it, make us the problem. Elena looked at the operational logs on the screen, the dates, the resource allocations, the scope of something that was not historical. Can he? She asked. Voss didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. The documentation package you sent us, Voss said. The original one, before any of tonight. It's time-stamped, chain of custody intact, submitted through the IG's formal intake system. Yes. So the investigation predates any contact he makes tonight. He can't claim voluntary disclosure after the fact. No, Elena said. He can't. but he can create noise. He can bring in people above my chain who have reasons to prefer this goes nowhere. Voss looked at her directly. If that happens, if this gets pulled sideways before the drive is fully decrypted and before the forensic accounting on the ledger is complete, the operational planning in those files stays buried. Elena looked at the screen, dates that hadn't happened yet. How long does the decryption take? She asked. Full decrypt? 18 hours minimum. And the ledger accounting? Casper says she needs 6 hours for the foundational structure, more for full tracing. So you need 24 hours, Elena said. Before anyone can make this go away, you need the evidence fully documented and formally entered. Yes. Then document it. Elena stood up from the table. All of it. Everything in this building, everything on that drive, every person in custody, and every statement they've made. You document it so thoroughly and so formally that there is no mechanism by which it disappears without leaving a gap so visible that the gap itself becomes evidence. Voss looked at her for a moment. You're describing a lot of work between now and sunrise. Yes, Elena said. I know. She looked around the administrative wing, at Darby, at the technical agent, at Casper visible through the doorway still at her workstation, at Rourke coming in from the east corridor with an update in his hand. You have good people. I do, Voss said. Then work the problem. Elena picked up her emergency kit from the corner of the workstation where she'd left it when she sat down. I'm going to check on my patients. She was at the administrative wing door when Voss said, Marsh. She stopped. The document you wrote, the one on the secure workstation. Voss's voice was careful in the way it was always careful, but there was something different underneath the carefulness now. It's going to be formally entered as supporting intelligence testimony, which means it's going to be read by people above both our clearance levels. I know, Elena said. Some of those people will know who you are, from the parts of your history that predate the nursing career. A pause. This is going to follow you. Elena looked back at her, at the room, at the operational logs on the screen with their future dates and their resource allocations and the shape of something that needed to be stopped. It already follows me, she said. That's not new. She walked out of the administrative wing and into the corridor, toward the medical floor, toward Pharaoh's Bay, toward the ordinary urgent work of people who needed what she could give them. Behind her, in the administrative wing, she heard Voss begin to speak, not to her, but to the room, to the people in it, the low and steady voice of someone organizing a response to something large with the tools she had, and the time she had, and nothing extra. The Montana night had 4 hours left before dawn. It was going to be a very full 4 hours. And somewhere out there, Richard Sauer was making phone calls to people with enough power to make federal investigations disappear. But the document Elena had written was already in the system, time-stamped and signed and entered into a chain of custody that didn't care who called whom at 4 in the morning. She thought about the operational logs, the dates that hadn't happened. Then she pushed through the door to the medical floor and went to check on Sergeant Pharaoh's fever, because that was the next thing that needed doing, and she had learned a long time ago that the next thing was always the only thing worth thinking about until it was done. The fever had come down 2 degrees, small, but the right direction. She noted it in the chart, adjusted the monitoring parameters for the remaining overnight hours, and sat for a moment in the low light of Bay 3 while Pharaoh slept. She was tired. She was also not finished. She thought about the photograph in the gray case, the man on the right who she hadn't said enough about, because there were things she couldn't say and things she chose not to, and the line between them was one she'd been navigating for long enough to know where it sat. Garrett Lund. She'd last seen his face across a table in a building that didn't exist in a country she couldn't name. 18 months before the program he ran was officially discontinued. He'd had the look then that some men got when they'd been doing something long enough that they'd stopped questioning whether it should be done. She'd had questions. She'd asked them through the right channels, in the right sequence, and had gotten answers that satisfied the process without satisfying her. And then the program was officially discontinued, and she'd filed it under things that were finished and moved on. It hadn't been finished. She'd moved on anyway, to this, to the work in front of her, to Pharaoh's fever and Donna's quiet efficiency and the broken suction line in Bay 2 that she'd fixed in week 1 because it needed fixing, and she was there and she could. She looked at the monitor numbers, all of them in the right direction. Outside the bay window, the first very faint change in the quality of the dark, not yet light, but the beginning of the suggestion of it, was happening over the mountains to the east. She picked up the chart, made the final overnight notation, and set it back in its holder. Then her phone buzzed. Not the personal device. The second phone, the one she kept on a different network, the one only 3 people in the world had the number for, the one she'd used to send the original message to the IG contact and hadn't received anything on since. She looked at the screen. Not a text. A voice message. 7 seconds long. From a number she recognized as one of the 3. She pressed play. The voice on the message was not the IG contact. She knew this voice from somewhere else, from the other part of her history, and it said 4 words in a tone that made the hair on her arms stand up. They know you're there. 4 words. She played the message again, not because she hadn't heard it clearly the first time, but because she needed to hear the voice again, the specific register of it, the pace, whether there was anything underneath the words that told her more than the words themselves. There wasn't. Just the 4 words, and the quality of silence before them that meant the call had been made from somewhere without ambient noise, somewhere chosen for that reason. They know you're there. She put the phone in her pocket and stood up from the chair beside Pharaoh's bed. He was still asleep, his breathing even, the monitor numbers holding in the direction they needed to hold. She looked at him for 2 seconds, the burned arm, the steady vital signs, the face of someone getting through something hard. And then she walked out of the bay and back to the administrative wing. Voss was at the central workstation when Elena came through the door. She looked up, read something in Elena's face, and said nothing to the 2 agents nearby, just moved to meet her at the far end of the room by the window. I got a warning, Elena said quietly. From a contact. Someone in the network above Sauer knows I'm at this facility. Voss processed that with the compact efficiency she brought to everything. By name? The contact said, they know you're there, that's all. Do you know what it means specifically? What knowing your presence here changes for them? Elena looked at the window, at the dark outside going gradually less dark. It means whoever is above Sauer, whoever designed the operation in those planning files, knows that someone with contextual knowledge of Garrett Lund and the discontinued program is in the room where the evidence is being processed. She paused. It changes their calculation about whether the evidence can be managed. Someone with that knowledge, attached to this investigation, makes it harder to reframe what's in those files as something routine or misinterpreted. You make the case harder to bury, Voss said flatly. Yes. Which means the pressure coming in through the oversight committee isn't just about the evidence. It's about removing you from proximity to it. Probably. Voss looked at her steadily. What do you want to do? It was a genuine question, and Elena understood that it came with a genuine answer required. Not deference, not passing the decision, but an actual ask about what Elena Marsh wanted, which was not a question she'd been asked in a professional context in a long time. I want to finish what's been started here, Elena said. And I want the people who designed what's in those planning files to face what they built. She held Voss's gaze. That's what I want. What I'm going to do is whatever is most useful to making that happen. Voss nodded once. Then stay in this building and stay visible. If someone is calculating whether you're a problem, let them calculate against the fact that you're embedded in an active federal investigation with 4 agents who've seen everything you've seen tonight. She turned back to the workstation. The best protection right now is transparency, not cover. It was the right call. Elena knew it the moment she heard it, the way you knew things that aligned with how you'd already been thinking. She pulled a chair to the nearest workstation and sat down. She stayed through the remaining hours of the night. Dawn came into Iron Vale's administrative wing in thin strips through the horizontal blinds, the Montana light doing its slow climb from suggestion to fact. By the time it was fully morning, the facility had the particular feeling of a place that had been through something and was still processing what that meant. The night had produced its results. Casper had the foundational ledger structure documented by 6:14 in the morning. The full disbursement network, the shell entities, the 14 facilities and their respective authorization chains, and the secondary transaction layer connecting Pruitt's network to the private security contractor. She'd submitted the forensic accounting summary to Voss's secure chain at 6:47, then poured herself a cup of the break room coffee that she held without drinking while she stared at something on her screen with the expression of someone who had done very demanding work and was allowing herself 60 seconds to feel that before moving to the next thing. The hard drive decryption team, working remotely, routed through the IG's technical division, had broken the first encryption layer at 4 in the morning and the second at 7:12. By 8, enough of the operational planning files were readable that the case had formally expanded beyond the IG's jurisdiction, and a notification had gone to the Senate Armed Services Committee's oversight staff. Not a request. A notification, which was a different thing. The evidence was in the system, and the notification was the system acknowledging it. Sauer's attempt to flip the narrative, his claim of voluntary disclosure and unauthorized investigation, hit a wall at the timestamp on Elena's original documentation package. The IG intake system logged it at 7:43 the previous morning, more than 14 hours before Sauer made his first contact with the Oversight Committee. You couldn't voluntarily disclose something that was already formally received and time-stamped ahead of you. The legal mechanism for his play didn't exist. His attorney, reached by phone at some point in the early morning hours from wherever Sauer had gone to ground, apparently told him the same thing because the narrative attempt stopped. What didn't stop was the pressure from above. Elena felt it in the quality of Voss's phone calls, the ones she took in the corner of the room with her back to the space, her voice deliberate and unhurried, which meant she was talking to someone who outranked her and was saying things she'd already decided on before the call started. 3 such calls between 5 and 8 in the morning. After the third, Voss came back to the workstation and sat down with the expression of someone who'd held a line and knew it but wasn't ready to celebrate. Senate oversight staff is taking the planning files directly, she said. The intelligence community layer is being handled through a different channel. My investigation retains jurisdiction over the procurement fraud, the 4 individuals in custody, and the facility network. She looked at Darby, at Rourke. That's not nothing. That's most of it, Darby said. It's what we can prosecute on solid ground, Voss said. The rest will go where it goes. Elena understood the shape of what Voss wasn't saying. The planning files, the operational layer, Lund, and whatever the Resumed program was, that would be absorbed into a process with no public face, handled by people whose names would not appear in any account of what had happened at Iron Vale. The outcome of that process was not guaranteed. It was not even knowable from where they sat. What was knowable was the procurement fraud case, the 4 people in custody, Pruitt's cooperation, and the network of 14 facilities and 9 shell entities that had moved $11 million through the U.S. military medical system over 3 years. That was solid. That was prosecutable. That was real. It wasn't everything. But Elena had learned, over a long time in work that dealt with impossible situations and partial victories, and the necessity of accepting the limits of what any one person could accomplish, that not everything was not nothing. The thing you could actually do was always worth doing, even if it wasn't the whole of what you wanted. She thought about the voice message. 4 words from a contact who had, by sending them, put themselves at some risk. Someone who knew she was there and wanted her to know that the people on the other side also knew. A warning, which was a form of care, however compressed and professional. She'd think about that later, about who it was and what it cost them to send it and whether she owed them something in return. Later. At 9 in the morning, the Montana State Police arrived in coordination with the federal investigation to formally process the 4 individuals in custody for transport. The county road outside the facility had 2 additional vehicles from the IG's field office and a support van from the U.S. Marshal's regional office. It was not a subtle convoy, and the staff and patients visible through the facility windows watched it with the focused attention of people who'd spent the night understanding that something large had been happening in their building and were now seeing the physical evidence of it move. Pruitt came out first. He came out through the main entrance in federal custody, hands restrained in front of him, wearing the clothes he'd had on the previous morning and looking like someone who had spent the night making decisions about what to give up in exchange for what he hoped to keep. His face had the compressed, careful expression of a man who was not yet at the full accounting, but could see it from where he was standing. Elena was at the triage desk when he came through the main corridor. She was reviewing morning charts, the same task she'd been doing on the day he'd called her a fraud, in front of 17 people and a phone camera. She didn't set the chart down. She didn't stop reading. She looked up once, met his eyes for 2 seconds, and looked back at the chart. There was nothing in those 2 seconds she needed to perform. No satisfaction, no anger, no particular statement, just the look of someone who had been doing her work all along and was continuing to do it. He looked away first. She kept reading. The three others came out through the side entrance under heavier supervision, and then the facility convoy moved out of the parking lot and down the access road toward the county highway, and Iron Vale Military Medical Center was quiet. In a way it probably hadn't been for 3 years, the kind of quiet that came when something that had been running underneath the surface of a place finally stopped running. Voss found her at 10:30, and they sat in the break room with actual hot coffee. Someone had made a real pot, deliberately, as if the act of making good coffee after a terrible night was a small form of insistence on normalcy, and neither of them spoke for a moment. "You're staying on rotation?" Voss asked eventually. "I have 31 days left on the assignment," Elena said. "There are patients here who need continuity of care." "After last night, you could reasonably request early completion." "I know." Voss looked at her coffee. "The document you wrote. The intelligence testimony. I submitted it this morning with a formal note about the source credentials. Not your file, just the verification that the source has direct operational knowledge of the program and the individuals named." She paused. "Your name is attached to it." "I know," Elena said again. "It's going somewhere your name doesn't usually go." "I know that too." Voss looked up at her. "Does that bother you?" Elena thought about it, which was a way of respecting the question. "No," she said finally. "I've been trying to do things quietly for a long time, and it's useful, being quiet. But quiet isn't the same as invisible, and invisible isn't the same as safe. Whatever I was trying to protect by keeping my name out of things..." She stopped. "It didn't keep Lund's program from continuing. It just kept me from knowing it continued." She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. "I'd rather know." Voss was quiet for a moment. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "Someone who showed up to find fraud and stayed to be useful and then left." She said it without judgment, just observation. "That's what contractors do." "I am useful," Elena said. "I also can't put something down once I've picked it up. It's a flaw. Some would call it something else." "Some would be wrong about a few things," Elena said, and Voss almost smiled, the closest she'd come to it in 18 hours. "What?" The formal investigation results came in stages over the following weeks, and Elena was at Iron Vale for all of them, doing the morning triage and the wound care and the shift handoffs that were the actual texture of the work, the part that didn't get recorded in federal case files. Pharaoh's fever resolved completely by day 3. He transitioned to outpatient care on a Thursday, and on the day he left he shook her hand in the ward corridor with the careful grip of someone whose left arm was still in recovery, and said, "I'm going to say something next time," which was all she'd asked for, and more than she'd expected. Donna Gable submitted a formal complaint to the facility's oversight board about the procurement monitoring failures that had allowed Pruitt's network to operate across 3 years. She documented it herself, without being asked, in her own time, and she did it with the thorough specificity of someone who had been paying attention all along and had finally found a mechanism for that attention to matter. Briggs resigned before the complaint was processed, which was the choice of a man who understood his culpability without being willing to face it directly. The facility's parent command appointed an interim administrator from the Regional Oversight Office while a formal search was conducted, and the interim administrator's first act was to commission a complete review of all contractor access protocols. The maintenance request Elena had filed in Week 1, the suction line in Bay 2, had still not been acted on. She filed it again, this time through the interim administrator's office, with the specific equipment model and replacement part number, and a note that it had been initially submitted 17 days prior. It was fixed within 48 hours. Small, but the right direction. Ortega applied for a nurse practitioner program. He told Elena about it on a Tuesday afternoon while restocking the supply cart, not looking at her, in the offhand way people mentioned things that mattered more than they were letting on. She asked which program, and he told her, and she said it was a good one because it was. He nodded once, finished the restocking, and moved on. That was the whole conversation. It was enough. The federal case against Derek Pruitt was filed publicly in the 6th week after the night at Iron Vale. The charges were specific and sourced: procurement fraud. abuse of authority, obstruction of a federal investigation, and conspiracy to defraud the United States government. The filing named him as the primary operational coordinator for the Meridian Med Group network and identified two other individuals in his chain, the contracting officer in Billings and the DLA aide whose number appeared in Pruitt's recent calls, as co-conspirators. The filing was public record. It went into newspapers and legal databases and the institutional memory of the military medical system. The details were specific: 14 facilities, 9 shell entities, $11.3 million over 38 months, all of it documented in forensic accounting language that left no interpretive space. Pruitt's cooperation had earned him what cooperation typically earned: a reduced charge structure and a sentencing recommendation that was less severe than the full weight of the case would have produced. Less severe was not nothing. He was looking at a federal conviction, loss of rank and benefits, and a period of incarceration that his attorney was negotiating actively and would likely succeed in reducing somewhat. His career was finished. His access to the military system he'd exploited was finished. The authority he'd built through a decade of institutional intimidation, the complaints filed in people's records, the scheduling changes, the careful administrative manipulation of people who couldn't fight back, had been exposed in a public legal document as the mechanism of a fraud operation. None of what he'd done to Elena was in the federal filing. The public humiliation, the credential audit, the escort out of the facility, those were the small instruments of a man protecting something larger than his ego, and their consequences were part of the larger accounting. But Elena thought about the people before her. Martinez from Phoenix, Kruger from the VA system, the ones who'd left inside 30 days because a man with administrative authority and no accountability had decided they were inconvenient. The ones who hadn't come back, who'd filed no complaints, who'd moved on to other assignments or left the work entirely because the cost of staying had been too high. She thought about that sometimes, and it sat uneasily, because those people couldn't get those experiences back. The case against Pruitt didn't undo what had happened to them. Justice, when it arrived for what was documented and provable. And a lot of what happened to people in institutions never got documented because the people it happened to didn't have the particular combination of knowledge and access and nothing left to lose that had let Elena do what she did. That wasn't a reason to stop. It was a reason to be honest about what justice could and couldn't do. Colonel Richard Sauer's situation played out differently, in a different part of the system, with no public filing and no press coverage. What Elena knew of it came through Voss in a phone call 6 weeks after Iron Veil, precise and brief. Sauer had been placed on administrative suspension pending an investigation by the Inspector General's office in coordination with the Senate committee. His clearance had been revoked. His travel had been restricted. The investigation was ongoing and its outcome was not yet determined. Garrett Lund had been identified and located, she learned this from the same call, at an address in Portugal, which was not a country that made federal extradition straightforward. Legal proceedings were in progress. The timeline was long. The resumed operation described in the planning files had been interrupted. How completely, Elena didn't know. That was in a part of the process she couldn't see, handled by people she'd never meet, with tools she no longer had access to. She sat with that uncertainty because sitting with uncertainty was part of the work and always had been. Certainty was a luxury that the nature of these things didn't provide. The testimony document, Voss said, near the end of the call. It's been formally received and is part of the Senate committee record. Sealed, but permanent. Okay, Elena said. It's going to matter, even in ways you won't be able to see. A pause. I wanted you to know that. Thank you. Thank you, Elena said. She meant it. Not for the reassurance, she didn't need reassurance, but for the effort Voss had made to close the loop, to treat her like someone whose investment in the outcome deserved acknowledgement. Not many people in this kind of work made that effort. On the last day of her assignment, Elena packed her locker in 20 minutes and walked her floor one final time. The suction line in Bay 2 was fixed. The medication cabinet in the East Corridor had a new key code and a rotation schedule. The emergency generator panel in the sub-basement had been added to the facility's official egress map as of the 3rd week. She'd submitted her formal feedback on the contractor onboarding process to the interim administrator's office. A detailed memo outlining 7 specific gaps in facility safety oversight and contractor protocol. She'd written it in the same voice she wrote everything, clear and specific and without drama, and she'd submitted it because the gaps were real and someone needed to know about them, and she was the person who'd found them. The interim administrator had sent a 2-sentence acknowledgement. She'd read it and moved on. She stopped at the nursing station. Donna was there, running the morning triage desk, doing the work she'd always done, but differently somehow, with the quality of a person who'd discovered that the attention they'd always paid could be directed somewhere beyond its previous boundaries. "Safe travels," Donna said. "Take care of the floor," Elena said. "That's what I do." Donna paused, something moving in her expression that she wasn't sure how to deliver. "What you did here, you did it too," Elena said. "You and Ortega and the night staff and Pharaoh, who was a better patient than he had any obligation to be." She held Donna's gaze. "Nobody does this alone. I just had a specific set of things I could see. You had things I couldn't see. That's always how it works." Donna looked at her for a moment. "You make it sound simple." "It's not simple," Elena said, "but it's not complicated in the way people think it is. Usually the complicated part is just deciding whether to do the thing you already know needs doing." She picked up her bag and walked toward the east entrance, not the door she'd been walked through under escort, not the door she'd watched Pruitt leave through in custody, just the east entrance, which was a door, which opened onto the Montana morning, which was cold and clear and smelled of altitude and something coming from the west that might be weather by afternoon. She stood in the contractor parking lot for a moment with her bag over her shoulder and looked back at the facility. The glass of the entrance doors reflected the mountain range behind her. The parking lot was half full. A supply vehicle was making its morning delivery at the loading dock on the south side. Normal. The ordinary continuity of a place doing what it was supposed to do. She turned and put her bag in her car. 3 days later, sitting in a coffee shop in Missoula that she'd chosen because it had good light and was not connected to anything she'd done in the past 6 weeks, she got a call from the liaison office. A new rotation, a different facility, different state, 300 miles from Ironvale. She said yes. She said yes because that was what she did. Moved into the places where there was work and did the work that was there. 12 years of it behind her. However many more ahead. She was 41 years old and tired in the specific way of someone who'd spent a week on very little sleep following a month of institutional friction. But underneath the tired was something that was not quite satisfaction and not quite purpose, but was the closest thing to both she'd found in a normal life. She was not a legend. She was not a symbol. She was a nurse who had done what she could see needed doing, in a facility where people had tried to make her invisible. And the visibility she'd ended up with was not the kind she'd wanted. It was complicated and exposing and came with a name attached to a Senate committee document she'd never be able to read publicly. But the suction line in Bay 2 was fixed. Pharaoh's fever had resolved. Donna Gable had filed a complaint that would be in that facility's institutional record for as long as the facility existed. The procurement network that had moved $11 million through the military medical system was dismantled and named and prosecuted. None of that was nothing. She thought about what she'd said to Pharaoh the night before he was discharged, when he'd tried to thank her for coming back to the medical floor during the evacuation, and she'd told him it was the next thing that needed doing, and that was all. He'd looked at her with the particular look of someone who was 26 and had just come through something and was trying to find a framework for it. "How do you know," he'd said, "what the next thing is? When everything is going wrong at the same time?" She'd thought about it. She'd given him the honest answer, which was not the neat answer. "You don't always know," she'd said. "Sometimes you get it wrong. You pick the wrong thing first, or you're too slow, or you miss something and have to go back." She'd looked at him directly. "But the question is always the same. What's right in front of me that needs doing? Not everything, not the whole problem, not the best possible outcome. Just what's here right now that I can actually do something about?" He'd been quiet for a moment. "And if you can't fix it? Then you do what you can and you move to what's next," she said. "That's not failure. That's just the work." She sat in the Missoula coffee shop with the liaison office confirmation on her phone and the new facility's intake paperwork loading on her screen, and she thought about what the next 60 days would look like. Different patients, different staff, different gaps in the infrastructure that nobody had gotten around to fixing. Different versions of the same work she'd always done. She would go in as a contractor. She would wear her badge and her scrubs, and she would learn the floor in the first 2 hours and fix the first broken thing she found that could be fixed. She would do the work without drama and without announcement because that was how the work got done. She was not naive about what waited. Institutions carried their own weight, their own resistance, their own version of men like Pruitt who'd built small kingdoms out of other people's inability to fight back. She would probably encounter another one, probably more than one, over whatever came next. She was under no illusion that Iron Veil had resolved a pattern rather than a single instance. But the pattern was made of individual instances. And individual instances were what she could do something about, one at a time, in the rooms where she actually was. She picked up her coffee. She'd learned something a long time ago, in conditions she couldn't describe in public, that she'd carried into the quieter years without always knowing how to use it. The people who looked weakest in a room were often the people who had chosen not to perform their strength yet. Chosen was the operative word. Not incapable, not unaware. Chosen. Because there was a moment for things, and the moment wasn't always when someone else decided it should be. She'd been laughed at in that corridor. She'd been escorted out of a building by men who thought the escort was a conclusion. It had not been a conclusion. The power in a room is never where people assume it is. It's not in the loudest voice or the highest rank or the person who moves first to establish dominance. It's in the person who knows what they know and waits for the moment when knowing it matters. The person who can walk through humiliation without losing their center, because their center doesn't depend on what the room decides about them. Elena Marsh had never needed Derek Pruitt's approval to be competent. She'd never needed the validation of the soldiers who laughed in that corridor to know what she'd done and what she was capable of. What she'd needed, what anyone needed, was the structural access to do the work. And when that had been taken from her through abuse of process, she hadn't spiraled, and she hadn't performed indignation, and she hadn't left. She'd looked at what she had and found the angle that was still open and used it. That was what strength actually looked like, stripped of the versions that movies and institutions preferred. Not the dramatic reveal, not the moment where everyone suddenly understood. Those things happened sometimes, and when they did, they were satisfying in the way that satisfying things were. But they weren't the source. The source was the decision, made in advance and remade every day, that your knowledge of yourself was not contingent on being recognized by anyone else. She finished the coffee. She picked up her phone and confirmed the new rotation. She would drive to the next facility. She would walk in with her bag and her badge. She would read the floor in the first 2 hours, find the broken suction line, or the missing egress map, or the supply discrepancy, or whatever shape the problem took this time, and she would do the next thing that needed doing. And if someone decided she didn't belong there, she would let them make that mistake. She was very good at letting people make that mistake. Outside the coffee shop window, Missoula moved in its morning rhythm, traffic and pedestrians, and a strip of mountain visible between the buildings, the particular western light that made everything look slightly more real than it did anywhere else. A city going about its business. People inside institutions and outside them, doing what they could see to do. She watched it for a moment, just that. Just the ordinary sight of a place being itself. Then she picked up her bag, walked out the door, and headed toward whatever came next.